Our last speaker of the day, we'd like to welcome Indy Johar, who's a co-founder of Project 00, which is behind Open Desk, an open space furniture company. He's also involved in the Wiki Housing charity and behind setting up multiple social investment funds and impact hubs around the world. He is going to talk about the democratic revolution. Thank you. Revolution.
No worries. Thanks. Good evening or good afternoon, and you guys you're really holding in there, which is quite impressive. I suppose I want to talk a little bit about this, no small topic. But I think what we've been hearing today is actually a transformation, a much larger societal transformation that we're part of. And what we're part of is a different type of conversation. And a lot of the work that I think we've been up to in London, 00 and everything else has been really focused on how do we democratize our cities and our places. But not democracy in a kind of this sort of sense. Not democracy in a kind of just the vote sense, but democracy as the power to create society. And the power to create society, too often we reduce democracy to the vote. And if you look back at the history of how democracy was built, actually, certainly in the UK, well, actually it was as much about the banks for the poor and schools for the poor as before we get to the vote at all. So it's about the democratization of capital, knowledge, capacity, before you even get to the vote. And we often reduce democracy to this kind of reductive notion of the vote, where actually democracy is the power to create society. And if we want to talk about this, I think we're at a really challenging moment. So the rise of Trump, Brexit, AfD in Germany, stuff that we've seen going on in Austria, I think we're at a different tipping point. And there's a reason for this tipping point, I would argue. This graph, which is kind of unusual in a conference like this to put an economics graph on the table, but I think it's useful to us to know. One on the left-hand side, my left here, is the elephant graph, it's called. And it's really interesting. Because do you see where the tusks are? Those tusks are basically the middle classes in the West, where the benefits of globalization have largely not been attributed. So you see it dips down, have not really been attributed to middle classes and the low middle classes in the West. So America, UK, Europe, many other places. And you see it rises up for the kind of top 1%, well, they're fine. And we've seen a large section of growth in the middle, and actually there's a sticky, actually huge population. There's a sticky somewhere near, actually when you look at it, less than 3.1 billion people have, so 3.1 billion people have actually earnings of less than $2.50 a day, which is insufficient to keep their health up and running. So just to give you a figure, there's massive numbers in play. So I think we're at a revolution about how we create value and how value is attributed. I was fortunate enough to be part of the Inclusive Growth Commission, the Royal Society of Arts, Manufacturing and Science. And one of the key things that came out was that actually if we're going to talk about inclusive growth is not going to just be about the distribution of value, but it's actually going to be about the distribution of how we make value, right? So it's no longer going to be possible just to say, oh, we're going to just distribute profits, but actually it's going to be about how we distribute the process of how we make value. And I think everything you've been hearing today, my view, has been about the democratization of how we create value. It is no longer the C-suite, 5 people in a room that innovate, and everyone else does the work or is classed as labor. I think there's a profound shift going on. And in a way, we're moving away from this kind of innovation loop of the very few that innovate and everyone else that consumes to a different cycle. And I think when we talk about craft, I think we're talking about craft in not as a kind of nice adjunct to the new economy. I want to put forward an idea that craft is going to be the way of the new economy, right? Not an adjunct, not a new nice to have, but actually the way the new economy will work. And in a way, everyone talks about this, the fourth industrial revolution. If you get out of the room, this is what all the big manufacturers are talking about. Well, the reason why they're talking about this is because you can own machines. You can't own people, right? You can own things, but you can't own people. So capital often talks about industry, but actually the real revolution is what I would argue is the human revolution. Now, this diagram, I think, is really illustrative of actually why I think this is important. In a way, So in the pre-industrial or the craft economy, you would argue that the pre-economy was actually what William Morris was talking about with the birth of craft. And there was a huge political fight going on about why craft was essential to effectively preserve the economy and the democratization of labor as it was. And what we've now returning to is a new cycle of actually this new fourth economy, which brings us into a new craft economy. The big major economy will be transformed. And this is not about the distribution of production. This is about the distribution of innovation, right? Now this for me is really important because everyone talks about the distribution of production, what 3D printing can do, but actually what's more profound is how it distributes innovation around the world. And that means that we have to have a different type of society if we want to democratize innovation and the capacity to innovate. We were fortunate enough to be part of, we set up WikiHouse Foundation, which is an open source housing charity, foundation actually, a charity, which is operated from 2010, where you can print your own houses using site assembly. Literally, you can 3D route your houses, and there's now 30-odd chapters around the world doing this stuff around the world, open source kits as well inside that. You can actually, we've just now fully tabulated this, and Alistair Parvin talks about this very eloquently. You can actually fully cost it automatically. It automatically builds a full cost spreadsheet. And you can unlock different types of sites. This is microsites. So Dev in Andy Reeve in Birmingham is unlocking all the microsites in Birmingham. So because there's a new economy on how you can unlock these sites. We also set up OpenDesk, which is an open source furniture company, where in the first 4 weeks we had something like 8,000 downloads literally around the world, where people were printing our furniture, taking pictures of it, and sending us variants. This is in 2011, so we're talking some time ago. And this furniture company that's operating now, it's a fully independent company, and it's been producing furniture for all the big manufacturers you can think of. But I think what's interesting here is in the act of doing this stuff, we started to learn quite a lot. Now, what we started to learn was actually this kind of transformation of distribution and manufacture was actually changing some fundamental things. Now, here's one of them. So I think what we're seeing is a profound transformation in what it means to be human. Right? So we often talk about the human as this kind of idea of the individual as a discrete, singular object. But actually, in this economy, if you want to democratize innovation, you're going to have to democratize the capacity to create, to innovate. Our economy is designed around very few people creating and most people effectively being in labor, i.e. operating like bad robots, where you got to produce what your contract tells you to produce. What does an economy look like when you start to democratize creativity, democratize innovation? I think is foundationally a different economy. That is the transformation we're on as a part of a process of technology. So why do we talk about universal basic income? I think these sort of conversations are out there because they're foundationally talking about a new type of societal infrastructure. So trials going on in Finland are all about how do we democratize the capacity for citizens to innovate and create. That is a different idea of what it means to be human. Human not as a bad robot, one who is forced to do what they're asked to do. How do we distribute bad jobs to people? But actually humans as additive processes to creating value. Here's a little anecdote. Every human you've met today is more powerful than any general artificial intelligence that you'll ever meet, certainly till the next 2040 at least. Every human being. Every single human being is more powerful. Yet, I think we treat other human beings and ourselves as actually little worse than actually outsourced bad robots, if not worse. What does a society look like when you start to unlock everyone's full capacity? I think that's a foundational question to where we are. And it also asks some fundamental questions of what it means to be human. The illusion of you as an individual is actually just a convenient illusion. Your brain is not something that sits in here. Your brain is a social product. If I was to isolate any one of you, put you in a little box for 2 years, well, frankly, you wouldn't be that smart, right? Your actual physical body is actually a multitude of organisms coexisting together. It is no longer a singular idea, right? And then we can go into further things in terms of epigenetics and anything like that, and you start to realize how contextually born you are. So the effects of poverty are transmitted through your grandparents to you. So if your grandparents felt poverty, the impact of it is they're transmitted to you. We know the impact of stress, micro levels of stress, actually means that your body will not absorb nutrients. We know that micro levels of stress actually can increase cortisone levels, which increases your tendency for diabetes and other acute diseases. So we know that our bodies and our physical idea are much more of a relational idea. How do we release our full capacity when we start to know this? How do we actually think of the human at the center of this economy when we start to know this? And also, the second part of this is not just about humans, but it actually is the idea of management. So I want to put forward the idea that actually management is a pretty ineffective idea for a complex world. This is a graph, piece of diagram work that was done by the Cabinet Office in the UK, which looks at all the drivers behind obesity, right? There is no single one driver, there's no single one magic bullet, which is conveniently the illusion whenever anyone presents you a problem or a solution. Here's the problem, here's the solution. Well, actually, it's never like that. There are 60, 70, 80 different drivers behind it with probably hundreds of different organizations that are producing and impacting the level of obesity. How do you do change in that world? That is not going to be a command and control centralized idea of one genius sitting in a room. That is going to require innovation which is fundamentally democratized and decentralized and distributed, but working together. That is a completely different model to the management model we've been sold. Management is great for command and control theory. But in a complex world, it actually becomes virtually impossible. So this sort of world requires collective masscraft, a kind of new way of behaving, not just with yourself, but collaboratively with other people. And it applies to other problems. So housing, I don't know about yourselves, but in the UK, we have a massive issue with housing. And politicians every year stand up and say, we're going to solve the housing crisis. Nothing happens. And largely because it's a complex problem. It's not just about building housing, although that's one part of the solution. It's a complex problem with multiple issues. So how do you solve problems in that reality requires a different way of organizing. And a different way of organizing, which requires a different sense of what it means to be human. This is a piece of work we did in Dubai, looking at actually, if you want to go and live in Dubai and work, the number of agencies, all those blue dots at the bottom, are agencies you have to interact with to actually go and live in Dubai. If you want to reduce that time, you have to innovate not with one service, but with 60, 70 different services. So what does innovation look like in that model? And what does innovation look like when it's actually distributed and decentralized? And that, I think, is our fundamental challenge. And it's a fundamental challenge for democracies. If democracies want to preserve themselves, they are going to have to be able to innovate in a complex world. If they can't, then we actually default back to Trump-like worlds, where we resort to the authoritarian. And I think this is a real structural challenge for us. So how do we solve complex problems, for me, is one of the kind of next big issues. And it requires different behaviors, and I can talk a little bit through them. But in a way, you can look at how actually complex organizations work, all the way from recognition, coordination, collaboration, and synthesis, and there's a lot of work that we're doing around this stuff. But also, this world is being unlocked by different technologies and different behaviors. Smart contracts or programmable contracts, not blockchain, doesn't have to be blockchain, actually cloud-based smart contracting can unlock foundationally a different behavior. A different way to do linked contracting with swarms of organizations collaborating together in a way that we've never seen before. It challenges the idea of the corporate as a bounded system. But it also requires, from my perspective, innovating down below the services. So it's not enough. If you want to deliver the WikiHouse, 3D printing the WikiHouse is the easy bit. The hard bit is getting the mortgage. Because in order to get the mortgage, what you've got to do is be able to actually turn it into a financializable asset. In order to be able to do that, you've got to be able to structure the warranties. How do you do the warranties is you've got to be able to secure every part of the chain. And if you have a decentralized design and production model, Either you centrally underwrite it, and if you centrally underwrite it, I become the quality assurance person, i.e. I centralize what innovation looks like, or I have to build a new model of quality assurance. And if I can do that, then I can talk about actually a decentralized distributed model of production. So a lot of the work that we're doing right now is reimagining what does quality assurance look like in a decentralized distributed world. How do you build additive insurance, not just additive products, which allow for a full hackable economy? So whilst it's cute and nice and relevant to be talking about the lovely, nice things, underneath those nice things are a bunch of institutions and institutional behaviors that structure how we make our world. And to innovate, we're going to have to innovate those to be able to actually release this from not just being the top-end market of the world, but actually genuinely being the market that makes the future. And I call this the boring revolution. It's the stuff that's not exciting. It's the stuff that we don't enjoy because I can't put sexy images up, right? So it's the stuff that says actually the financial models can be substantively different. And financial models suddenly can become actually system financing. I can not only finance the product, but I can finance the outcome, or I can invest in the outcome and the product, as well as the synthetic benefit. That changes the nature of how we create value, but also fundamentally how we price value, which allows us to think about things in a much more richer, complex way. All because, foundationally, I think the real revolution we're going through is a bureaucratic revolution. Airbnb is a bureaucratic revolution. Uber is a bureaucratic revolution. What did it really destroy? It changed administration and management. I think what you're seeing the birth of is the post-management city. And in that model, you can start to think of new ways to finance things. So we're doing a piece of work in London around financing we won a competition to look at actually how to build the High Line in London, in Camden. And we're looking at also new ways to finance it using smart covenants. Because you can suddenly do really incredible things in a real-time economy that you could never do. So not only can you think about new products, but you can also finance them in radically different ways. And together that allows us to think about different ways of operating. This is a piece of work that we're doing around programmable property rights. What happens if you can actually change property rights to not just being about current development, but also future development, and sell and trade them differently? Now, why I'm showing you this is because I think these things change what we make and how we make them. Land rights have structured how we make our cities. How we can make them again is also the bureaucracy of that is foundationally changing. But also, what does it mean to design things? Products. Is a design of a thing the physical thing itself, or is it the performance? Suddenly we can actually do performance-based product design, which is foundationally different, and we can have that data fully embedded in. What does that mean for regulation? Well, actually, do we need planning regulation, or do we need outcome-based planning, which no longer tells you whether this must be a restaurant or a house, but actually talks about the social impact of that unit there? So is it producing waste? Is it producing light at wrong times, noise at wrong times? Can we start to actually foundationally reimagine how we create regulation? And if you start to do that, you change the nature of our cities and the performance. And the building logs. So one of the big things we're working on is effectively a new additive insurance product on a smart receipt. Because one of the things we realized was if you could do an additive receipt, every time I hacked the product, I could just add something else to that receipt. So suddenly I could preserve the warranty infrastructure, which meant that I can create products which are fundamentally hackable and recyclable in a way that's never been done before, largely because I can change the nature of the receipt. Obviously the financing side. So what I want to talk, I suppose my talk really wants, the emphasis I want to give is I think we're part of a bigger conversation. And I think this craft economy that we're seeing is actually the new economy. It's not a subset, it's not a microset, it's not a smaller part, it is the behavior of the new economy. And I think we have to become bolder in recognizing that transformation. And in order to release that, we need new institutional infrastructure, definitely. But also we need to recognize the value of humans as no longer functions of labor in an industrial economy, but functions of creativity in a new craft economy. That, I think, is the new humane revolution. It's not an industrial revolution. It's a revolution of what it means to be human. And in an economy which doesn't treat people as overheads. So currently, if you have a business, your humans, we are overheads on the balance sheet. We are literally the overheads on the balance sheet. That's why CPD is a kind of nice to have thing. Because effectively, you don't sit on the balance sheet. You're not on the value product of the company. The products are, the machinery is, but you're not. And yet we often talk about humans are our core assets. Well, if they are, they're not on the balance sheet. And if you don't exist on the balance sheet, I'm really sorry, we are the burden. We need to shift that. And that means shifting boring stuff like accounting, where humans are the source of creative wealth. And in a way, I think that's the only way we can preserve our democracy, is if we can democratize the capacity to create and innovate, and thereby make our societies. I don't think this is a solution, there's any other solution. And I think places like here, where you're having these sort of conversations, which I think is really important, I think this is about a 50-year transformation of our economies in a deep sense, all the way through to this future. And a new type of democratic city, which includes the vote, but actually means changing all our institutional infrastructure with the technological infrastructure at the center of it. And a new type of city. With that, I thank you.